Okay, are we recording now? We should be, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're recording.
Mangalapa, everyone. That's hello in Burmese. My name is Jay. I am currently the Asia organizer for World Beyond War. I am here with me today is our Europe organizer, Anna Chiara. We are a global non-violent movement that aims to abolish the institution of war while promoting a system of peace. So for our webinar today, we'll be focusing on Myanmar. We wish to further understand the country's situation. Second, how its people responded to the call of the times. And third, how we can extend solidarity to the Burmese people's efforts to achieve genuine democracy and peace. By the way, this event is also part of the Month of Action for Myanmar, organized by the Quakers Movement and Friends Peace teams. So, our speaker today is Debbie Stothard, the founder of Altsayan Burma. She, her first public activism was when she was 15 years old. At 17, she became a crime reporter at a national daily in Malaysia, and she hasn't stopped causing trouble since. In 1987, she became a student activist in Australia and continued to engage in solidarity with human rights struggles in Asia, including Burma, China, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. She was also involved in student rights and anti-racism movements in Australia. And in 1996, she founded Altsayan Burma. She has served as Secretary General of FIDH, the International Federation for Human Rights, from 2013 to 2019. And she's the chair of ESCRNet, that's International Network for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and board member of the global feminist organization AWID. And she is also the chair of the International Campaign for Rohingya and chair of Innovation for Change. Everyone, before I turn over the microphone to Debbie, please send her your heart or clap emojis. Let's all welcome Debbie. Debbie.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. I just realized that I did plan to share a PowerPoint and then I didn't call it up, so I better do it right now. It's great to see all of you here, and it's a nice way. Tomorrow is the last day of the week, so it's the working week, so it's nice to see you on Thursday. And also to the friends who are off camera, because Jerry's saying that Kenji, her colleague Kenji, is also listening in. What has happened in Burma, Myanmar in the past few years have been very, very shocking. And as an activist who has been supporting, I'm not Burmese myself. I'm originally from Malaysia. So, hi Kenji. One of the things that I just want to be very clear, I'm actually Malaysian. I'm not Burmese at all. But I'm very honored that there are Rohingya and other people from Burma in this webinar. So I look forward to hearing back from you. Um, but as someone who got involved in the movement in 1988, it has been absolutely shocking to see the level of violence. So it's very appropriate that World Without War is hosting this. Because the level of violence in Burma has been unprecedented. Unfortunately, the election, the sham election that the military junta organized hasn't really reduced the violence. So I hope you can see the full screen now. And actually, this is a little bit of a promotion because while our team, a very hardworking and dedicated team, worked through Christmas and the New Year. In fact, we didn't have any days off in December and January because of the sham election held by Min Aung Hlaing's regime. There were 3 stages of voting, and this is partly because the whole process was highly militarized. They had a shortage. They were using these voting machines. And they had to move voting machines from one place to another. And also they needed to move their troops to militarize the areas where voting was being held. So there were 3 phases of voting. One was on the 28th of December. The other one was on January the 11th, and then January the 25th. And so our team worked through the whole break and later, further on after the voting, to keep track of what was going on. So please feel free to use that QR code. That QR code actually gives you a briefer that is an overview of the sham election. So we say from sham to scam because it wasn't just a fraudulent process. It actually was also aimed at somehow cheating the rest of the world that some kind of election was held, so everything is fine now, and we can resume normal relations. You can resume your economic connections, your economic relations, and diplomatic relations, because even though the election is not free or fair, it was some kind of election. So that is the kind of scam that the military junta was trying to perpetrate. But when we look at this in the polling period of 5 to 6 weeks, we had 1,288 armed clashes and attacks on civilians in 178 townships. So the whole country is made up of 330 townships. So 178 townships were subjected to military attack, mainly on civilian targets in the country. And that included 308 murderous airstrikes. And some of these airstrikes were absolutely shocking. Most of them were clearly, it was intentionally targeting places of worship, schools, internally displaced camps. A wedding was targeted with an airstrike. A funeral was targeted with an airstrike. So it seemed that they had sent drones. In many cases, they sent drones ahead to surveil the area, so they knew who they're killing. And even during the election period, the military confirmed that they will continue with forced conscription. For those who are not aware, in February 2024, 2 years ago, the military, having lost many of their troops to defection, a lot of military and police left, escaped, and some of them even joined the armed resistance. Others were killed in combat. So the military decided that they needed more fighting soldiers. So they implemented a law that was brought in before the transitionary period by Senior General Tan Shui that authorized the military to forcibly conscript people, and I'm saying men and women, between the age of 18 and 35. Now, so far in this past 2 years, there's been at least 100,000 people forcibly conscripted. And it looks like the military is going to continue, because they have actually confirmed they will continue with forced conscription. And what we're very concerned is that they're going to accelerate that. And we can already see in Thailand, for example, the criminalization of asylum seekers as illegal migrants. And in Ranong, in southern Thailand, the authorities have actually handed over these detainees to the military junta and who forcibly conscripted these people who were deported back to Myanmar. Now, what was very interesting was that out of the there were 67 townships where voting was banned totally. And then in the other townships where there was supposed to be some type of voting, there were, even in the townships where there was supposed to be elections, those towns, 4,000 wards and villages, that means like suburbs and smaller had smaller administrative sections, 4,000 actually were excluded from the election. So 4,000 villages and wards were excluded, as well as 67 entire townships. When our team actually looked at the census data and started calculating, we realized that 10.5, at least 10.5 million voters, people age 18 and above, were excluded from voting in these areas. And then we also noted from the figures, the number of the votes that were counted by the military junta, another 11 million people courageously boycotted the elections. And I say courageously boycotted the elections because the military was really intimidating people. People were when they were going in some places on the outskirts of Yangon, when they were passing the military checkpoints and police checkpoints, they were told to show their voter registration number. People were being rung in the local areas, in the wards. Local administrators were actually ringing people saying, we know how many people are in your house. You better make sure you come and vote. And in some rural areas, people were told, if you don't vote for the election, it means you're against the election. If you're against the election, you could go to jail for 3 years. So people were being pushed. People were actually, and some of the authorities were actually coming to the house and saying, you got to go and vote. So the fact that 11 million people boycotted the election, found ways and means to escape or to overcome this threat and intimidation is really amazing. So only when we look at the numbers, the last election that was held was in 2020, at the end of 2020, and this election was overturned by the military, by the attempted coup, because Min Aung Hlaing claimed there was fraud. But in the 2020 election, it had double the number of people who voted, and it had double the number of voting stations. And in this picture, the Rohingya, who are survivors of the genocide, and I would say are now facing a second wave of genocide, are still out in the cold. Their situation has not improved at all. So here's some figures, and you can see from that chart, 38% of the eligible voters voted, and 32% boycotted, and 30% were excluded. So we could see that in no way, shape, or form, this sham election fulfilled any type of representation. So when we say it's gone from sham to scam, what we're saying is that Min Aung Hlaing is trying to scam us into thinking that somehow this election is a reasonable, it's a reasonable form of democracy, and it's a reasonably legitimate process, when it is not at all. The number of polling stations in 2020 were nearly 40,000, 39,963. And this time it was only 21,517. There was a turnout of 13.1 million votes compared to nearly double, which is a 25.9 million votes cast in the 2020 general election. So the voting was held in only 39% of the country's territory. And this is another critical issue. The amount of violence that was being done, the increased airstrikes, the increased attacks, was because the military junta did not have control over the majority of the country's territory. So they held some type of election in less than, well, in 39.86% of the country's territory, because, and that's why they needed to have to say officially they had voting in X number of townships, but actually in those townships, even parts of those townships didn't have an election. So we can already see that, it is really an attempted scam, this whole electoral process. And if we look at this graph, you can see in the 2 weeks, the week before and the week after phase one vote on 28 December, there were 84 airstrikes, 425 armed clashes and attacks. And then it rose during phase two and even higher during phase three voting. We're looking at the airstrikes. So we could see they had more and more airstrikes, but we were quite shocked to see that around phase two voting, there was actually an increase in both airstrikes and the general number of armed clashes and attacks on civilians. So in the month after vote, and then the fourth bar is looking at the month after voting. And in the month after voting, in the 2 weeks after voting, we saw 373 armed clashes and attacks and 99 airstrikes. So we saw quite a few problems there, in the sense that there's no noticeable decrease both during and after the election period. But also, we need to look at political prisoners. So here is on the right side, on the left side of the screen, here is the screen grab from AAPP, the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, from yesterday's data. And you can see that there's 22,808 people still detained as political prisoners. Now, by comparison, and this is something that's important to note, at the last time we had a sham election was in 2010. And many people were hoping that this 2025 sham election will be a similar exercise to the 2010 sham election. Why? Well, in 2010, the NLD was not, and various ethnic political parties were barred from participating. But as soon as the election was over, Aung San Suu Kyi was released, and eventually the NLD came to the parliament through by-elections in 2012. And there was a gradual opening up. And so people were saying, well, maybe this is what this will make the military feel more confident and they'll feel more secure. And then they will open up the situation and then the NLD or whomever will come back. Well, Min Aung Hlaing learned from this process. So he made sure that nobody can come back ever after this sham election. So by comparison, at the time of the 2010 sham election, there were 2,189 political prisoners. That's 9.5% of the current number. There were, when the 2020 election happened, there were just over 600 political prisoners at the time of the last election. So you can see this explosion of numbers is telling us that there's no intent to ease the situation. In fact, in the lead up to the election, the military brought in this election protection law that even imposed the death penalty if someone is implicated in anti-electoral violence that led to a death. But most of the cases we saw was lengthy jail terms for people who put up anti-election posters or made comments on social media or even liked a posting on social media. So during the period of between September and January, we saw that 404 people were charged under the junta's election protection law, and 9 people received lengthy jail sentences of up to 49 years in jail each, simply for putting up posters against the election. Now, the number of political prisoners continued to rise during and after the election. So all of these are very, very bad signs that we should not simply blindly hope that things are going to get better, as the junta is trying to imply. Now, what's happening with the Rohingya? Now, the Rohingya community continued to be stuck between genocide, forced conscription, and hate campaigns. In Arakan state, the home state of Rohingya and Rakhine, voting was held in only 3 out of 17 townships. So obviously local people were not supportive of this sham election. And in fact, most of Arakan state was under the control of the Arakan army. The USDP, the Union Solidarity and Development Party, the military junta's party, bribed and exploited Rohingya in some of these places with cash and identification cards so that they would vote for the USDP. Now, this is actually quite interesting because in other parts of the country, people complain that when they press the button to vote, if they randomly pressed it or if they intentionally pressed it, the vote kept registering to the USDP and not the party they wanted. So there were a lot of complaints about this type of fraud. But in Arakan state, they simply tried to bribe Rohingya with cash and identity cards to say, you vote for us, since the Rakhine not going to vote for us. Now, what was also quite shocking was that there is actually a party called the National Diversity Party, which was the Peace and Diversity Party, which is ironically named because it's an ultra-nationalist party aligned to the USDP. So this Peace and Development Party officially adopted genocide as policy and said that they would continue the policies and behavior of the military against the Rohingya. For the USDP itself, they actually included a candidate, an electoral candidate, Lieutenant General Aung. Now, so people who were following the atrocity crimes in Kachin State, the north of the country, and which was, the LID 33 actually went and committed atrocity crimes in Kachin State, and then were posted to Arakan State and were involved in the 2017 genocide against the Rohingya. So this Lieutenant General Aung, who was notorious for his role in the genocide, ran as a candidate for USDP in Shan State. He lost, but his candidacy proved that the regime promotes perpetrators and supports them instead of trying to hide them. International cuts to aid in Bangladesh also led Bangladesh and India to force Rohingya back to Burma and made them very vulnerable to try to escape to Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia by paying human traffickers money for them to not to be forced back to Burma. And while this is all happening, Rohingya continue to be vilified and criminalized in India, Bangladesh, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. In fact, there's a huge problem in Malaysia where a number of Rohingya women and children are actually in what looks like indefinite immigration detention. Under these conditions, safe and dignified return of Rohingya to Burma is impossible, because Rohingya who go back to Arakan state would probably face at a high danger of facing forced conscription by the junta or by the Arakan army. And in this picture, even ARSA, the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, is actually trying to forcibly recruit refugees in Cox's Bazar to join them. And they are in this situation aligned to the junta. So there are no durable or viable solutions yet for the Rohingya. And we do need to remember that refugee protection, protection for survivors of genocide, for refugees and asylum seekers who are from Rohingya community, as well as other communities, need to be prioritized. People say, "Oh, we can't," and the responsibility to protect means we can't send peacekeepers to Burma. Don't talk to us about RTP. But R2P, the responsibility to protect, can be exercised by various states in their jurisdiction. You have asylum seekers who are Rohingya or from other parts of Burma. You have survivors of atrocity crimes in your jurisdiction. You don't have to send anyone to Burma. Just protect these people. Don't force them back, and give them the means to create their own livelihoods, to support their family, and to take care of themselves. So when we look at the sham election, we also look at the economic situation. At this point, there are no indicators that the sham election has or will improve economic confidence and the economic situation. The junta's priorities are quite overwhelming. In the past 5 years, they've pushed resources and revenue into war with resistance groups and the civilians in resistance-controlled areas. So at this point, from looking at the ongoing violence, it's pretty clear that this priority will overwhelm any agenda to protect or rebuild the economy. And let's not forget, these airstrikes and military attacks have targeted both social and economic infrastructure, schools, places of worship, hospitals and clinics, thousands and thousands of homes and dwellings, as well as shops and factories, have been destroyed willfully by the military junta. So they've not actually sought to try and limit economic damage. In fact, they have not just bombed and destroyed infrastructure and threatened the economy by forcibly conscripting young workers, but they've also been bombing and laying landmines and destroying a lot of the rural areas where food is being grown. So that actually is affecting food security in the country, and that's why the price of rice has risen by 350% in less than 5 years. So this is quite shocking and quite horrific, and that's why it's no surprise that the Myanmar kyat has depreciated. What we saw during the election period is that the Myanmar kyat did not appreciate. The Myanmar kyat didn't strengthen during the election period. It didn't strengthen significantly. We were thinking, well, people were saying, a lot of people saying, we think the economy is going to get better after the election. Even if the election has its problems, at least, our economy will improve. We didn't see that. What we saw was a sharp rise in the price of gold. And when the price of gold goes up, and the global prices went up too, but in Burma, we saw a very steep rise, and that's always an indicator of economic insecurity. Now, our team, who worked very hard on producing sham election digests and who have produced these briefers, were also keeping an eye on what political parties were saying. We were deeply shocked to see that almost all, except for one party, the PPP, they didn't have any economic policies in their manifestos. None of them spoke about the scam centers which have plagued the country's borders. And I've actually said it before, while the junta at one point launched an airstrike on a scam center, this was done this was done after that most of the people had moved away. And these scam centers are there's all these periodic crackdowns on scam centers to appease China, but most of the time they've already relocated. But nobody has actually said anything about scam centers, and almost all except one tiny political party had no economic policies to speak of. And so sometimes when we say, why is China so obsessed with scam center? Why are so many countries obsessed with scam centers on the border? We also have to remember the biggest scam center in the country is in Naypyidaw, and that the military has relied on revenues from these scam centers. Scam centers are one of the cash cows, so they're not likely to completely halt this big threat. They will just keep going along and doing things to appease China, but not necessarily change the whole system to actually stop it once and for good. So we will see that the regime will, and I say the regime because this fake parliament is not, and this fake parliament is actually an expression, an ongoing expression of the regime. It's not likely to have the capacity or power to address soaring inflation, Myanmar Chart depreciation, and goods shortages created by the junta, because the junta is trying to stop, they are stopping imports. They're stopping food imports, medicine imports, all the imports that civilians need. And what they are increasing is imports of aviation fuel, imports of weapons and the means to make more weapons, imports of surveillance technology. All that is coming in, but not food, not medicines, not clothes, not books, not the things that people need for their dignity in their daily life. So we anticipate that the regime, in whatever form it takes, will continue to extract more natural resources and impose more arbitrary taxes. And this is quite shocking. In January, migrant workers who were scheduled to fly to East Asia through this government to regime arrangement, the regime had made them pay a lot of money and supervise this whole process. As they were about to fly out from Ingledon Airport, they were suddenly told, no, you cannot leave. There's a new tax, and you have to go personally all the way to Naypyidaw, queue up, and get another permit. So all of these are strategies by the junta to squeeze more and more money out of people. And we're going to see the rise of transnational crime, corruption, conflict, and displacement in the country, with continuing economic devastation. So there are many things that we can do and we should do, but hopefully this gives you something of a reality check using facts and evidence to get the discussion going. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Debbie, for that in-depth discussion. Right now, we would like to open the floor. If any of the participants have any questions, comments, you can address it to Debbie. We'll have an open forum for somewhere around 15 to 20 minutes. Anyone? You have any questions, reflections about the discussion? You can type it in the chat box, or you can raise your hand. Also. No questions? Debbie will be the one to ask questions if you don't have. We'll have a quiz.
Well, what is possible, and I hope that this is going to make help you to think about, and it's the protection and the needs of asylum seekers and refugees, including Rohingya, who are the most vulnerable. That we have young Rohingya women who are using the privilege of their passport. Some of them have resettled, going to visit Rohingya communities that have been overlooked, like in Aceh, in Sri Lanka, and Malaysia, and so on. But one of the things is that there a lot of the hate campaign is being used for political benefit of certain political parties and leaders in the past when there's an election going on. So the presidential election in Indonesia in 2024, in the lead up to that, there was a lot of hate campaign against Rohingya boat people in Indonesia, even though Rohingya are actually one of the smaller groups of refugees currently in Indonesia. So they purposely targeted the Rohingya in Malaysia too during COVID, and more recently, Rohingya also vilified. And what has happened is that there has to be, we actually made a film called Resisting Hate, and it exposes this hate campaign, but also what people can do to address the hate. And this is something that's quite important. We do need to speak out against hate campaigns, not just against Rohingya or against women or against young people, but a lot of, not only people from Burma, but hate campaigns that target other people elsewhere. So we do need to actually push our respective governments to ensure they exercise their responsibility to protect to people from Burma who are in their jurisdiction at the very least. And there's also, it's important to note that in many countries, refugees don't have the right to work. And many refugees actually want to work. They don't want to rely on UNHCR or INGO handouts. They actually want the dignity of being able to work to take care of their families, because they don't want to be a drain on the local economy. So this is quite important to understand. Tess, you got your hand up, and Jerry and Jebet. One of the things is many of the host countries are not using the fact, many of the host countries are using the technical fact that they didn't sign the Refugee Convention. And some of them allow UNHCR to kind of stay there at their discretion. So UNHCR doesn't really have any power. And in fact, some of the countries like Malaysia and Thailand made their own national refugee determination policy, where in Thailand, they were saying that they will not include Rohingya under their refugee determination system because it's a national security problem. And in Malaysia, they're saying you have to register with the Malaysian authorities, and then we will decide if you are refugees. And if we decide you're not refugees, we'll deport you. So it's quite a scary situation that people are trying to use their own, abuse their power, the domestic level. And Jerry, in Malaysia, we don't even know the exact number of people in detention because the ICRC, I think, who has ability, some of the INGOs have ability to go into the detention centers, are told, we are only allowing you in here if you don't tell anyone what's going on. So sometimes people would, if people had money, they would bribe the guards to let them use the phone and so on, and then you'll know who's inside. But it's not a normal prison where prisoners have the right to visitors and they don't have the right to receive humanitarian supplies. So there have been people who collect like, baby formula, sanitary napkins, toiletries so women can wash their children and so on. And then you say, can I give this? Then you say, just leave it with us. I said, how do we, can you actually take a photo of the people receiving what we sent? And they said, no. So, you just have to trust and hope that these guards are actually giving it to the people you hope to help. And they're not actually insisting that for more bribes to do that, or they're not using it themselves. So we just don't know. There's no transparency around it. Okay,
I will
Tess.
ask the unmute test.
Thank you so much, Jay. Hi, Debbie. It's been a long time that we've been doing our advocacy work with and for Burma. Thank you so much for your updates on the situation right now in Burma. I have to let others know that I'm working with the Philippine Arab Cooperation Council Incorporated, which is closely working for and with refugees and asylum seekers in the Philippines. Precisely the reason why I would also like to inform that, yes, there are Rohingya young people in the Philippines studying right now in the universities and colleges. And um, we would like to get more of their advocacy work also working with us in terms of the plights of other Rohingya um, across ASEAN right now. Why across ASEAN? We would like to inform that, of course, the Philippines has a non-recognition stance regarding Myanmar, and for all we know, Philippines is the host country for the ASEAN this year. So we would really like to work on how are we going to do a strategic and alliances with other groups in the region, and how are we going to do the campaign if there's an ongoing campaign regarding Myanmar. Thank you very much.
Thanks for raising that, Tess. And also, Raquel Castillo is also involved in the organizing of the ASEAN People's Forum, ASEAN Civil Society Conference. So this is actually a very important time. The Foreign Minister, Secretary Lazaro, went to Burma, to Naypyidaw prematurely, and then learned her lesson because all our friends in the Philippines and in the region spoke out very loudly, and so she actually ended up meeting with the resistance as well to balance things out. So I think I'm really excited and happy to hear that you're working with Rohingya, and Rohingya youth are actually allowed to go to college in the Philippines. That's such a great news. Yeah, there's a lot that we can do because Philippines is the chair of ASEAN this year. And that's why there's been a lot of groups, a lot of delegations from the Burma movement coming to Manila. And I'm hoping to get there at least once this year as well. But we really do appreciate the solidarity of friends from the Philippines. They have been engaged from day one, from a very long time ago. And that's also because of this very vibrant movement against the Marcos regime in the 80s, the 70s and 80s, and that strong sense of solidarity. So we do need to sort of encourage everyone to support Philippine civil society during this particular year that ASEAN is being chaired by the Philippines. So we really, really need to do that. But I also wanted to say that a number of opportunities have come up. Last year, the ILO adopted Article 33 on the situation of Burma. So the International Labour Organization actually now has made a stand officially that they have the option of applying sanctions on Burma. The ILO is a powerful organization because it's tripartite. It's made up of representation from trade unions, employers, and governments. So when they actually make a decision, and if they actually apply a sanction, it really puts a lot of pressure on the global community who form the membership of the ILO to implement. This is why in the early 90s, sorry, in the late 90s, in early 2000s, when ILO threatened to apply sanctions on Burma over the crime of forced labor, the military regime of that time actually adopted a law outlawing forced labor. And they did persecute people who denounced breaches of this law, but they actually felt compelled to listen to the ILO because they were really afraid. And in that case also, ILO was one of the first intergovernmental or international agencies to be allowed to set up an office in Yangon. The UN Human Rights Council, the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights, during the time of transition kept saying, "Oh, we'll see you in Yangon. We're going to move there. We're going to set up an office there." And every year they saw us at the commission, the council. They would say, "Oh, we're going to move to Yangon. We'll see you when we set up the office." But they never ended up being able to set up the office. The only main group that could set up an office in that context was the International Labour Organization. So we do need to see that. We do need to see that ASEAN took unprecedented steps. In 2006, Myanmar was supposed to chair ASEAN. In 2004, civil society and members of parliament from the region launched a campaign to prevent Burma from chairing ASEAN in 2006. And ASEAN said, "Don't be crazy. It's impossible to defer membership. It's a very strict rotation. It's set in concrete." They said, "Yeah, you have to make a campaign on principle, but don't waste too much resources on it." But in the end, it did change. And Philippines actually chaired ASEAN that year because the military junta was forced to withdraw, to save face and withdraw as a chair. Now, this time around, nobody actually had to do any work or advocacy to say Myanmar shouldn't chair in 2026. It was already taken for, it was a given saying no way they can chair. Yeah. So there was no negotiation, no advocacy, and that's why Philippines is chairing this year. So and at the end of 2021, when ASEAN foreign ministers woke up to the fact that the number of armed clashes and attacks on civilians in Burma, Myanmar, by September 2021, that number was higher than in Afghanistan or Syria or Yemen or Iraq. All these were country situations on the agenda of the UN Security Council. When ASEAN got the wake-up call, they freaked out. They said, "Oh my gosh, this is worse." And the ASEAN foreign ministers actually agreed to bar political representation of Myanmar. That means they would bar the military regime from coming into the ASEAN summit and coming into the ASEAN foreign ministers meeting. And unfortunately, the economic ministers and defense ministers didn't have that ban. But that was also unprecedented. And now China asked the military to have this election, but they didn't really make much of the situation because they didn't expect. They just thought at least have some type of election, and then we can go back to business as usual. But in this process of appeasing China and trying to get some legitimacy, the military just couldn't help being violent and fraudulent too obviously, that people were kind of it was kind of embarrassing. So that's why when we say scam, China keeps saying they are worried about scam centers. Well, the biggest scam center is Naypyidaw. And Min Aung Hlaing tried to scam China by having this election. But we do need to be quite aware that there are many things that are possible. And one of it is actually getting ASEAN not to normalize relations with the junta, making people aware that this junta is not actually in control of the country. So don't back the losing part. That at the grassroots level and local level, there are resistance administrations providing services for local people where there's much more local democracy. In Karenni or Kayah state, since 2023, the state resistance set up their alternative state government called the Interim Executive Council, the IEC. And one of the first things that they did was they agreed and they implemented a 30% quota for women in leadership at the executive, legislative, and judicial levels. So while the rest of us were campaigning for a quota, they already went and implemented it. So that is quite amazing because it also sets the template for different groups who are pressuring and negotiating with the development of other resistant state governments that they must ensure, don't just promise, but ensure women's leadership and participation. And that is quite amazing. So there are actually a lot of great things that are happening on the ground, despite all of this violence. And grassroots communities are actually able to get resources across the border and distribute it. They don't have to depend on big international NGOs who need permission from the military to enter those areas. These are local people helping local people. So the issue is about making sure that they have resources to get the job done. So there are many, many situations. And what is really exciting is that ASEAN was involved in the inclusive federal economic policy. And in that, young people and women drafted economic policies for the future. 73% of the people who drafted were under the age of 35. 61% of the drafters were female. There were persons with disabilities, Rohingya, and other ethnic and religious communities, including migrant workers and displaced people, working together to draft policies together. And they actually came up with a package of 437 economic policies across 8 sectors. So, and this is really amazing because we had young people drafting policy while they were in air raid bunkers waiting for airstrike to happen. And they were so determined. And so we were so excited and so inspired that despite all these challenges and these threats, people were still determined to build their vision of the future. So, it is quite depressing if you look at what's happening in terms of the violence, but we need to also nurture this growth and these progressive movements forward that put peace as the basis of development, that put human rights and equality as the basis of development, that are interested in sustainable and enduring peace that has dignity for all, instead of short-term ceasefires that do not protect civilians or do not guarantee protection and rights.
Thank you so much for the questions and the answers. Then if we don't have any questions from the chat box, I have 2 questions, Debbie. One, I know that during the Malaysian chairship of the ASEAN, they kind of told the junta to continue with the election. But after the election, through the Philippines representative, they said that they do not recognize the result of the election. Was there any change in the way that the junta was, like, doing the whole with all the situation? Has has the pronouncement have any influence to the junta? And second, uh, what do you think can be done in terms of like engagement with the ASEAN structures if the junta is the kind of active in attending through their representatives in some of the mechanisms? Because I remember last year in November when we had a meeting with, I was still with iDefend at the time. We had a meeting with iChair, and a junta representative was there. And in the past, we kind of just, I know that some people kind of walk out if there is a representative from the junta. But at the time, we kind of just, okay, we're not going to mind you. We're not going to be talking to you, but we will still remain in the room. And the representative from the junta to the I chair has actually the audacity to tell people how to respect human rights and promote that they're one of the countries that has existing NHRI. So how do we deal with that?
I think you have to laugh at them. You just have to laugh. And I think, sometimes we take them too seriously. But everyone knows that the NHRI in no way, shape, or form complies with any elements of the Paris Principles. We say that they are as far away from the Paris Principles as the distance between Naypyidaw and Paris itself. So I think we do need to actually sometimes, when people say, what about China? I said we should laugh at China. Why is China being silly? Why are they being irrational? They are working against their interests by dealing with these losers. And when we look at the Aicha rep of the military junta saying all kinds of nonsense, it reminds me of a dinner that I had accidentally had a dinner with the Director General of the Central Statistical Organization of the military junta back in 1998. And he was telling me that Myanmar has the highest rate of literacy in Southeast Asia. And actually, he was using statistics from the 1960s, 50-year-old statistics. So he was boasting, and I just laughed at him. I said, and he was shocked that I didn't take him seriously. But I think sometimes we just have to laugh at people. But one of the things that we need to understand from the outset, even as early as 2024, a lot of the ASEAN governments had already been informed and had been concerned about the very high rate of airstrikes and military attacks. So when the junta started preparations for the election, they said, and even Malaysia said, reduce the violence first, make it an inclusive process. The first metric that ASEAN is concerned about is reduction of violence. Why? You can't have economic engagement when the country is at such a high rate of violence. And when there's violence, there's refugees and asylum seekers, and ASEAN doesn't like that. So you could already see that we do need that ASEAN actually had a relatively consistent position saying reduce the violence first. Then Thailand started to break ranks, Vietnam started to break ranks, Cambodia and Laos, the usual suspects. But in Malaysia's case, they did say reduce the violence and make it inclusive. What happened was the foreign minister of Malaysia flew to Naypyidaw and told them that. And then the military junta used its news to say Malaysia is going to send election monitors. And basically the foreign minister, and we had been warning saying, these guys are liars, be careful. And so when the Malaysian foreign minister came back and saw that news, I think he must have been thinking, what the hell is going on? So it actually by putting words in his mouth, it really reduced the goodwill and the trust. And so Malaysia actually hardened its position because they realized they cannot sound diplomatic or polite because it will be misused against them by the junta itself. So we know that, and that's why we are appreciative that there has been some degree of consensus among some ASEAN member states not to recognize the election, the scam election, and it's actually good timing because that moved from Malaysia to Philippines, and so luckily, because if you look at the conflict figures, the conflict numbers went up in 2024 when Laos was chairing ASEAN. So one of the big questions in ASEAN is you can't have a ASEAN special envoy that changes every year because this is a long-term issue. You actually have to have at least a cohesive plan of action and also understand where are the carrots and sticks that we need to use in this scenario. So, and we don't have that level of consensus. It is really a breakdown of regional leadership. And that's why the voices of civil society and other actors are extremely important. And I notice we have friends from Japan. So the voice of Japan is also very important because Japan originally supported the sham election and then later changed their mind when they saw the devastation of increasing violence. So we do need to actually keep that line going and keep that visibility of what's happening in Burma, Myanmar up and make sure it leads to action. At the very least, for those of us who are concerned about peace and a halt to violence, ASEAN and all the countries in this region need to support an embargo on military equipment and military technology and surveillance technology to Burma. That and also the aviation fuel embargo. We need to, at least if we say, okay, as at the start, at least we say we don't disagree with countries that impose this embargo. And we will consider implementing this embargo since this violence is a threat to regional security. So we need to start somewhere instead of saying this is bad, and still allowing the weapons and the aviation fuel to flow.
Thank you for the answer, Debbie. We're down to the last question. I'll ask Tess to unmute.
Okay, my last question. How is sanctions or embargo as a form of a campaign? Is it soft, hardcore? We've been debating sanctions long time back, Debbie. As you may know, in all our advocacy campaigns in the past. So regarding right now, where are we in terms of consensus building about sanctions? Uh, because my concern is how about from a humanitarian point of view and for our friends who are doing documentation of human rights violations inside. Thank you.
Thank you, Tess. That's really important question. And that's why early on in the shock of the coup, we had someone very influential calling for comprehensive sanctions. Whereas I think the majority of the movement recognized that the economy, the shape of the economy has shifted. It's not completely controlled by the state, although the military regime itself has really destroyed the economy. So most of the movement has been calling for targeted sanctions. And that means, and there have been targeted sanctions imposed on the military junta and leaders of state-owned enterprises, which are military-controlled enterprises. There have been campaigns by organizations like Justice for Myanmar and Blood Money Campaign that countries or companies that are doing business, like for example, for oil and gas, that they should put the revenues or the royalties into an escrow bank account, like a trust bank account, and not into accounts controlled by the military until the situation, the legality of the junta has been determined. So, and so some of the Western companies prefer to just sell their stake and leave instead of doing that responsible action. So definitely embargoes, some countries have already imposed an embargo on aviation fuel. Some of them have agreed not to allow weapons to be supplied to the military junta. And the military junta is actually making bombs. So there's all these factories in Burma that have closed down, but the factories that have kept going are the military factories that are making weapons and military vehicles. And one of the factories, factory number 12 in Tayet, is actually making custom-made bombs for Russia to bomb Ukraine with. So, and that's been documented by the Ukrainian side as well as the Burmese side. So it is possible to keep the movement going, and people have been pushing resources into the country to help human rights defenders and grassroots humanitarian activists to keep on doing their work. It is possible. We don't use the formal banking system, but it is, and a lot of resources get sent through the border, and it is very gratefully accepted. People have ways and means of carrying in humanitarian supplies. In fact, one group, someone that you and I know very well, Tess, they were able to get IDPs, internally displaced people, vaccinated with COVID during the COVID period. They bought the vaccines and hired Thai medical people to vaccinate the IDPs. And the Thais who decided they can't cross the border, they just drew a line on the border, and they got the IDPs to come to the line and put their arm over the border and get vaccinated. And a few thousand internally displaced persons were fully vaccinated using that method. So these kinds of amazing, innovative solutions created and devised by the affected community need to be acknowledged and need to be supported. They are cost effective, they make a huge difference, and they contribute to community resilience. So I think there's so much we can do, but the first thing we need to do is halt the military's means to commit violence.
Thank you, Debbie, for that answer. Okay, so we unfortunately have to close our webinar for today, but I hope that everyone were able to learn from the updates and information that Debbie discussed with us today. Before we end our webinar, I would like to invite everyone to open their cameras for those who can. If you were able to create your signs, placards, you can show it to the camera. Or if not, there's a sign, a solidarity sign that we are all using in solidarity, not just for Burma, but for everyone who has been struggling and fighting for democracy and human rights. It's the three finger salute. If you're familiar with Hunger Games, that's what we do. So this one. So Anna Kiara will be doing the screenshot. So anyone who can open their cameras, we invite you to open it and do the three finger salute or show the signs. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Anna Kiara. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Today, we invite all of you to, if you can post to any of the social media accounts that you have, the calls for democracy and calls for peace in Myanmar. You can also use the hashtags peace in Myanmar and democracy in Myanmar now. We'd like to recognize those who were present today. We have World Beyond War Japan, also Amnesty International and Quaker. We have here people from ASEAN Burma. We have Lupa Pilipinas, Kilusan Bataan. These are from Philippines. We have Cry, a representative from the world largest refugee camp in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh. We have the Burma Solidarity Philippines and ASEAN Civil Society Conference, ASEAN People's Forum Philippines National Organizing Committee, represented by Raquel a while ago. We have representatives from families of victims of involuntary disappearances or fined from the Philippines. We have Milk Tea Alliance today. We have Philippine Arab Cooperation Council Incorporated. We have Young Women Initiatives, Young Being, and Focus on the Global South Philippines office. We were actually able to reach to Philippines, Thailand, Japan, and Bangladesh for today's webinar. Thank you, everyone, for attending and giving us 1 hour of your time today. We hope that you learned more from this session. We will be having more learning sessions in the future. Just please follow our work. You can visit our website, Facebook, X, and other social media platforms. You just need to search World Beyond War. You can also send us an email for any collaboration work at asia@worldbeyondwar.org or my email, j@worldbeyondwar.org. And please do follow Outsi and Burma and their work. You can find them on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Debbie,
Jay, can you
for today.
please feel
Yes.
sorry, Jay, can you just send the PDF of the presentation to all
Oh, yes,
participants?
yes, yes.
We find it
I
useful.
will
Thank
I
you.
will send the PDF here. We will also send the presentations via email to those who have registered.
Okay. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you so
everybody.
much,
It was great to
everyone.
be in the
Stay
same
safe.
space as you. Bye-bye. Stay strong.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe, everyone.
Bye.
Okay.